All right, let's do this. I'm going to talk about why everything should be dark mode and light mode should never be allowed anywhere in user interface design. In other words, yeah, my people. In other words, dark mode maximalism is the idea today. My name is Baytaş. I'm baytaş.net on the web and at Dr. Baytaş on the social media. It is Dr. Baytaş because I have a PhD in interface design, basically, and I've been making interfaces since 2005. Today, I am design engineer at Attio. I maintain the website there. This is the company logo. The logo is here because they sent me here, and I appreciate it. Thanks, Attio. It's also here because we're hiring. We always hire designers, we hire engineers, we hire all kinds of people. So check out the careers page on our website, which my team built for you, and consider joining. It's a great company. I also make the Design Discipline podcast. And so the thing is, like, when you do all these things, you get a PhD in interface design, you build interfaces for a long time, you make design podcasts, talk to people, you form opinions about how design should be done. And today I'm going to talk about one of those opinions. Before I get to my own opinions, I want to talk about some other opinions in design. Does anyone know what these are? Do you recognize this? Shout it out. What is this? Dieter Rams, yeah, this is Dieter Rams' 10 principles for good design. It's his opinions of how design should be. Similarly, this is Virgil Abloh's kind of design language, his philosophy of design, which I think is better than this one for many reasons, but mostly because it's 7 items as opposed to 10, and fewer items is better when you're talking about philosophy. So these are an example of like someone's design philosophy, someone's idea of good design. And here's Massimo Vignelli's idea of good design, famously opinionated designer from New York. Not from New York, but he's famous for the work he's done there. He's Italian. He famously used very few typefaces, and he's very opinionated. I mean, this is an excerpt from his book that he wrote, the Vignelli Canon, and he calls the arrival of computers in design and desktop publishing, he says that it is a disaster of mega proportions and a cultural pollution of incomparable dimension. So we have these like designers who are opinionated, and I think opinions and personal philosophy is a huge part of design, which we don't have enough in tech. Also, there's this idea, so this is Rick Rubin, who's from California, so you should know him. He says there's tremendous power in using the least amount of information to get a point across, which is to say, to find one idea that will birth maybe 1,000 ideas for you, or finding one decision that once made takes care of 100 other decisions, 1,000 other decisions. The work of artist Jack Butcher exemplifies this very well. He uses very limited visual repertoire, very sort of particular typography, only one style of typography, only one style of line work and so on to visualize his ideas. And he depicts so many different ideas with this very limited vocabulary of like visual language. Maybe even better than he would have done with a diverse visual language. So following from all of these ideas, this is my design philosophy. This is my opinion of good design and interfaces, and that is good design is as little light as possible. So I will show you some examples of this first of all. What does this look like in interface design? Some companies who do this well are, for example, Vercel, Linear. They're kind of like known for their good design and for their dark design. I don't know if they actually believe in my philosophy, if they depart from the same place where like good design is as little light as possible and then arrive at like these designs. But great minds think alike, so they have ended up in this situation. Netflix's TV app is also another good example. Grok's app is a good example of this, and of course some surfaces on the Attio website. But if you look at the general Attio website, you will see that my opinions are not those of my employer. Anyway, these are some examples from our industry and what it looks like. I just want to talk a little bit about like why I arrived in this idea. It's actually a combination of 2 ideas. It follows from 2 different ideas. The first idea is that every medium or every instrument kind of has its own art or its own sort of things that it wants to express. In the world of music, if you play musical instruments, you might know that every instrument has its own kind of music inside of it. If you want to play the blues, you will choose a guitar like this. This has what we call single coil pickups. It has a particular bridge design that connects the strings. It has particular woods, etc. And you might want to play the blues on this guitar, but if you want to play like extreme metal or grindcore, you would pick a guitar like this, which has different electronics, different woods. and they will make different music for you. The second idea that leads me to the conclusion of dark mode maximalism is that screens are lamps. So if we talk about like every material has its own art and own music, screens are basically lamps. The truth, the sort of like the ground state of a screen is blackness, and on top of that we exert force and we exert energy to create images with light. Therefore, the screen actually wants to be black as a design material, and anything else is imposed by us on it. So following from these two ideas, I believe good design is as little light as possible, and everything should be dark mode. There are also like technical reasons, engineering reasons for why this is true. So dark mode does lead to like lower power consumption, for example. Researchers have found like 50%, 40% in their sort of energy consumption reduction when they investigated this. And they also found that dark mode reduces symptoms of dry eye, of eye fatigue, and so on and so forth. So when you take these ideas together, it's pretty much like objectively the truth that dark mode is much superior than light mode, and it should be the only choice. Like, it's just the fact, you know? So the more interesting question to me, rather than like why dark mode, is why light mode at all? Like, why do you want to produce so much light on the screen? And now we're going to get into like stories and meanings and symbology in design when we talk about that. So why do we use light mode? We use light mode, we design things in light mode because of a particular understanding of the symbolism and meaning of light and dark that we have. In the canonical understanding, it's sort of like a standard mainstream culture of Enlightenment thinking, of modernist thinking, the canonical interpretation of biblical stories and so on. The metaphor, the symbology that we associated with light and dark is that light is associated with positive things and dark is associated with negative things. This is Le Corbusier, 1930s, modernist architecture. This is his idea of good design and how we should live. Very different imagery. This is a picture of the allegory of the cave, Plato's idea, which unfortunately I can't tell the whole story of because we don't have time. But from a imagery perspective, we see in the darkness here, in this area, people are living in chaos. There's ignorance in their faces, there's fear, there's entropy. This is not a very pleasant world, although it is the world where the majority lives. And in this little corner of the image, where we have this light area, people are sort of chill and calm and enlightened, and this is a good place to live. So this is the imagery that is sort of like standard in Western thought. But there's also maybe other stories and other imageries and other symbolisms possible. So this is Caravaggio. In many of Caravaggio's paintings, the interesting thing is that the violence and the destructive things and the dangerous things happen in the light. There's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of negative energy happening in the light. If you're in this painting, you want to be in the shadows, you don't want to be seen, you don't want to be recognized, you don't want to be in the light, in the foreground, in this kind of environment. Michelangelo from the 1500s, this is from the Sistine Chapel, he's showing the creation of the world. This is the story of God working with the materials of the universe, tearing light from darkness. The interesting thing about this imagery here to me is that God, or this God figure in this painting, in these paintings, is very forceful. He's strained, his like muscles are bulging, he's throwing things around, and to the extent even like, so he's showing like the movement here, and like this guy, this figure, and this figure are actually the same figure, just like moving to the side. And there is so much chaos in the mind and in the behavior of this God figure that his pants are falling down. Like, why would you draw God in this way? In the Vatican, of all places. What is the story being told here? What does this symbolize? What these images symbolize is the Gnostic story. So the Gnostics are a particular sort of like, you can call them a secret society, or a sect of like underground alternative sort of branch of Christianity in a way. And their story, their symbology is apocryphal and esoteric, which means that it is not known by many, it is not mainstream, it is not sort of propagated very commonly. But in this story, in this understanding, darkness is the source of truth and calmness and integrity and wholeness, and light is a destructive and divisive force in the universe. We don't know if Michelangelo and Caravaggio were Gnostics and they subscribed to this thought and that's why they painted this way. But we do know, for example, in the work of William Blake from the 1800s, he does paint this exact story. So this figure who he calls Urizen, but in the Gnostic mythology is named the Demiurge, is actually the same figure that Michelangelo paints here as God. It's a retelling, a reinterpretation of the same biblical story, but the metaphor, the symbology is kind of reversed. And darkness is shown as the source of truth and the source of the universe. And this figure is engineering, overthinking, and sort of forcing existence of the world and existence of the light into this world. It doesn't end well for him. At the end of the story, we find him chained by shackles forged by his own thoughts, of his own overthinking. And the message here is that the truth is in the darkness, the truth is in the unknowable, and the enlightenment thinking, the sort of overthinking things is not going to get us to happiness. Kazimir Malevich, another sort of icon of modern art. This is the black square. This is interesting because the first time that this painting is exhibited, like legendary work of art in the history of modern art, it is hung in this corner, which in Russian Orthodoxy is reserved for like the holiest religious icons. And in this exhibition, Malevich puts this painting here, puts an image of darkness, saying almost like the truth is in the darkness. The completeness of the universe, the good that is in the universe resides in the unknown and in the darkness. And of course, in more modern art, Fontana tears apart the canvas, gashes the canvas with his knife, and shows you what is behind, or suggests that maybe there's something behind which you might be interested in. So this is like interpretations of the story of light and dark. But once we get into once we get interested in darkness, if you want to design with darkness, there are also so many other worlds and so many other meanings that we can that it can represent. So, for example, you can use darkness for humor. This is the photographer Hanger, G.L. Hanger, from 1915. He's made these postcards of different towns at night. This is Eastbourne. I think he has others too. But here the darkness carries the meaning of whimsy, of humor, of mischief. In the culture of metal, in the culture of rock and roll, hands up if you're a metalhead. Where's my metalheads? There we go. Yeah. Metal is a very innovative music. So the whole premise of rock and roll, the whole premise of this culture is innovation, energy, fearlessness, not being afraid of the dark, but using it as a creative force. And so there are these cultural meanings that you can find in darkness as well. Tadao Ando, legendary architect, he curates the light, he limits the light in his spaces, in the architecture that he builds. He draws almost these pictures with the lights, and here we find, as the meaning in this work, we find a more curated approach, these contemplative spaces, calmness, sublime experiences, these sorts of things. Balenciaga, famously known for their very black, very dark kind of works, has an interesting story. They are actually a company, so they are a brand, or the founding story of it is that the founder of this brand, Cristobal Balenciaga, was based in Basque country in Spain, and he endured the Spanish Civil War, and he escaped to France to run away from the war, where he started again his company, and then Second World War. So he's attacked again. So we find resilience, we find courage, we find dedication to design and craft and all of these things in the face of hardship, in the story of Balenciaga. Another fashion story, this is interesting because Zegna, very Italian, very sort of, purely Italian brand. And it's interesting because in Italy, if you go shopping, which I did a few months ago, and I asked them okay, where's the black clothes? Because they didn't have any. And they told me, we don't have black clothes in the shops because we only wear black to funerals. And here, this very Italian brand in 2004 used black to prominently sort of release their collection because this was a moment of rebranding for them. This is they changed their brand architecture. There were a lot of changes going on in the company, and they chose to sort of commemorate it or symbolize it with the black collection, where it's sort of talking about creative destruction and rebirth in the story of the brand. And of course, we cannot talk about blackness and darkness without talking about Rick Owens, but I don't have time to get into his full story. I might return to this slide for some other ideas later. So those are some meanings, some ideas. What I'm trying to say is that there's a rich universe of meanings and ideas that you can represent with darkness. It's not only, we sometimes think of it as gloom and negative things and these kinds of ideas, but there's so much more in there that we can represent. Finally, I want to conclude with some tactics. I want to give you some tips for interface design or for design work in general, which you can use if you want to adopt this design philosophy, or these are also ideas that I use in my designs because this is my personal design philosophy. Tactic number one is that you should always start with blackness. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Should be the starting point of all interfaces. There are people out there, they will tell you, oh, you cannot use pure black, it's not good design. And, you have to, your brand color hue has to be like, you need to tint the black. Those people are wrong. It's like, why would you create unnecessary light on the screen? That's not necessary. So start from pure black always, and then reduce your design. So I will show you what it means with two examples. This is a screenshot that I got from the website of a Swedish creative director, Tom Robin Karlsson, and he's very good. I love his designs. And this is a shot from his website. He's showing off his project. There's a very clear hierarchy and order of how things should be seen in this image. But also there's this text, which is like, to be honest, it's like terrible typography. This is not readable. It has a nice vibe. It looks kind of like cool, but like it's not readable. The line width is too long. The font is too small. It's just not good typography. But this is not a person who doesn't understand typography. This guy knows what he's doing. He's a very legit creative director. And I think what he's trying to say here with this layout design is that this isn't important. This is about reducing, taking away things from people's attention budget and not consuming people's attention and not bombarding them with extra information unnecessarily. A dynamic example of the idea of reduction or respecting people's attention budget is this one. This is my own website. I should have shown you with a video or with an interaction, but this is actually sort of like before and after. This is what it looks like when you load the site. This is what it looks like when you hover over something on the list. And what happens in the interaction design is that everything else, which is not in focus, kind of gets dimmed out. And this is an example of the tactic of reduction in interactions, whereas this is like the sort of static layout example. And finally, the third tactic, like we can talk about maybe how would you expand this philosophy onto other disciplines of design, other than even interfaces, other than things that happen on screens. And I think the idea of dark mode, the idea of like as little light as possible, translates very well to other design disciplines as the idea of as little foreground as possible. So architects do this, for example, by having these natural elements, these rocks, these trees, these sort of things that are in the environment already and integrating them into the building. Like instead of building another wall, you just take what is already there, and that kind of becomes your style. I think this was a house that was featured in the movie Ex Machina. Very, very good movie. You should see it if you're into AI, which all of you are. So anyway, this is the idea of as little foreground as possible. The idea implemented and like sort of contrasted with the modernist light idea, the light design idea, you can see here. This is again Le Corbusier. This is Swedish architect Lola Giesendorf, I'm not actually sure how to say it. But this is kind of her interpretation of the modernist brutalist aesthetic. Very similar geometry, very similar idea, but the philosophy here is very different, where this looks like maybe it's dropped here by aliens into this landscape. It doesn't look like it belongs there, but this design does. So this is my idea. This is my design philosophy. The point of this talk is, of course, I want to convince you that this is true, but I want to, I want to have good apps, and I want you to build those apps for me, and I want them to look nice and feel nice. Therefore, I appreciate if you actually take this and believe it and do it. But the main point of all of this, the meta idea, is that I think you all as designers should also go and look for these kinds of ideas that once you find them, generate 1,000 other ideas for you. And these kinds of like decisions, which when made, generate 1,000 other decisions for you, or take care of 1,000 other decisions. I found mine in this idea, and I hope you find yours.